to the Guidance Show. Mr. O'Mara here with Mr. Williamson, joined by Alex and Connor. So we're going to dive right into it. There's a follow-up couple questions from the last time we were on, so I will hand the reins over to Alex and Connor.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Mr. O'Mara and Mr. Williamson. I will be taking the first question. My question is, as we start to end the first semester and most importantly prepare for the next week, is there any part of the graduation requirements that are going to be looked over because of the pandemic, i.e. community service?
Yeah, so when it comes to graduation requirements, obviously the pandemic has impacted a lot. So certain things like you sort of mentioned, community service hours, the administration is definitely kind of making adjustments as necessary. I think that the goal is to still have students, doing community service, giving back to the community, whether that's Dover, Sherburne, Massachusetts, global community, kind of wherever, as much as possible. However, they definitely understand if, there are students who were planning on doing something that you just can't do anymore these days. So adjustments have absolutely been made. I think that if students have done, the general graduation requirement is 40 hours. If students have done 25, 30, the principal and assistant principal have said, you know what, I get it. That's a good number. We're okay. They haven't made any decisions about sort of, this year's juniors or sophomores or freshmen or whether those are going to be adjusted or anything at this point. But, hopefully those students will all have plenty of opportunities as, the vaccine starts rolling out and we kind of hopefully at some point soonish go back to normal. Same thing also applies for, the schedule this year is obviously a little bit tighter. You guys are all very lucky in that you were able to fit TV media and, have some fun with Mr. Sweeney. But then a handful of students may not have been able to get the electives or any electives that they might not only what they would have wanted, but just any in general. So there's also been a couple of allowances made for there, but that's not super common. Actually, many students were able to fit stuff in, even though the schedule is a little tighter. So I would say mainly the big adjustment in terms of graduation requirements is community service.
Awesome. Okay. Our second question is, looking back on the first semester, what do you think students have done well so far? And what are some suggestions that you have for how students can do better academically or socially in hybrid learning?
It's a good question. I think first and foremost, it's important for us to kind of acknowledge and understand that for everyone, we said this at the last show too, like this isn't a normal traditional school year. And students and faculty alike, I think we have to mention faculty as well, have done a really good job at adapting and kind of flipping everything upside down and just rolling with it. Like virtual learning is something that if you asked us 2 years ago was going to be a thing, we'd be like, not here, like that's never going to happen. And very quickly, the teachers and the students kind of made that flip. So it's important to kind of acknowledge that and say, like, that's not an easy task. And it's commendable for an adult to be able to do it. And then to watch all of our teenage students do it as well is something that I've actually enjoyed seeing. I feel like this whole pandemic has created a level of maturity in all of us that we didn't have before. Looking forward to second semester, one thing that I have found incredibly helpful for myself, which is very, you could transfer over to being a student as well, is just having that constant checklist. Every Sunday, sitting down for 15, 20 minutes and just saying, what do I need to get done this week? How am I going to get it done? When am I going to get it done? Because I think what we've all realized is, particularly with Wednesdays, we have a lot more of this unstructured time that feels very similar to what a college schedule looks like. In college, you won't have class from 8:30 to 2:30 every day, but you need to kind of realize that that's time that you need to be doing work. So kind of creating that schedule, creating that structure as much as you can. People just naturally thrive in a structured environment, as much as we may say we don't want to. And so academically, I'd say that's a good way to be successful if you haven't done so already. Socially, I'm looking forward to the warmer weather just so that we can get back outside a little bit more. Miss Lottie, Mr. Williamson, and I went for a walk around the track yesterday, which was a little chilly, but it's nice to get those kind of social interactions that we are all pining for. And in lieu of being able to do that, something that's really important is just really reaching out to people, having those conversations. Last Saturday, I just randomly called 3 of my college roommates just to say hello. One of them was a little confused because I probably haven't talked to him in a year and a half, but just reaching out and kind of realizing that while we all may be in our own little bubbles, we're all experiencing our own bubbles differently. So just respecting each other and acknowledging that like a day might be a little bit more crummy for someone, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I think also going along with that, from the social piece, one of the things that I sort of like about school when I was in school, but then also that I like kind of watching in the students these days is the fact that you're bringing together all the people who may not be best friends. You may not, happen to like call somebody that sits next to you in your math class to hang out on the weekend. You're kind of put together. And you have a lot of, good friends, obviously, but then also these acquaintances, people that are sort of like secondary. And my suggestion, I think for all of us, myself included, would be also to reach out to the people that aren't your normal go-to people. That part I think is missing a little bit these days. When you are only in class a couple days a week, and those students who are remote are, not necessarily forced to, hang out with everybody and the random other people who you may like but aren't your best friends. And I think that's missing, just that everyday camaraderie of hanging out with people that aren't your normal go-tos. So to the extent that we can, enjoy that while you're here in the building. When you're put together in groups, maybe in classes, if you're choosing your own group, choose someone else once in a while. That might be someone who isn't your normal best friend, so that you can kind of keep those tangential relationships going, because I think those are important and they will be important going forward.
All right, thank you. The next question is, what is something that you are looking most forward to in school during the next semester?
So I guess I jumped the gun on the last question and answered that a little bit. I'm definitely looking forward to the warmer weather. Being outside is just so healthy for all of us, and with everything going on, that the amount of time we're spending outside is definitely less than ideal. So I'd really just say that, and then kind of hoping for the best. I'm hopeful for a quote unquote pseudo-normal summer.
Yeah, I think the thing that and again, I don't know if I'm going to get it, but I'm most looking forward to is a little bit more clarity on what comes next. I think that we're at a point where sort of like the vaccine is just starting to roll out slower than maybe would have been ideal. And there's still a lot of questions about, okay, like when can we get back to normal? What is next year going to look like? Are we going to be able to do travel this summer and go on vacations? What's coming? And I think that probably within second semester, we'll have a little bit clearer idea of, what's even going to be possible going forward. And that I think will be helpful and like a little more settling. I think the uncertainty for myself, and I would guess for a lot of people, is hard. It's hard to have that weight of like not knowing. So I'm hoping that in the second semester, we get a little bit more of a sense of, where is that light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, I totally agree with that with Mr. Williamson. So in general, have you noticed many changes in grades so far this year as compared to past years?
I think anecdotally, there's definitely differences in the classes. I think, certain, like the math department is doing a lot more independent learning, for instance. There are a handful of teachers who are remote as well, so that it has a different dynamic. But when it comes to the grades, I was actually this morning printing out some like grade reports from the past couple of years, and first quarter grades were pretty similar, actually. I think across the board, in most departments, the averages were actually higher this year than they have been in the past, which kind of surprised me given, some of the conversations that I've had. But that's what the data says, is that the averages were actually a little bit higher across the board in most departments. It's also interesting to think about, what might go into that. And where are we in each class? Tim, Mr. O'Mara and I were talking, like he said, with Miss Lottie the other day, and she was saying that in her AP Bio class, they are exactly where they wanted to be in terms of like how far in the curriculum towards getting to the AP tests in May, which really surprised me. You know, I think there was a lot of talk about, you know, classes being so far behind. I think in the news, you know, I was reading somewhere that, you know, statewide or maybe nationwide, that classes are only 65% of the way, you know, along of where they should be. And I think that may not necessarily be true here, which is a good thing, you know, that we're not necessarily falling behind, quote unquote, as much as we would have expected. But it also means that, you know, there's a lot being expected of students. So, you know, while the grades are pretty steady from where they've been in the years past, that doesn't necessarily mean that the experience has been the same. So that's something that we're trying to keep kind of tabs on, which I'm glad a lot of your questions have been about, like, so student health and mental health and stuff too, because that's always in the back of, if not in the forefront of our minds too.
That was the perfect segue to my next question. Because the next question is, have you noticed a difference in students' mental health after winter break?
Excuse me. So I think, like I said earlier, structure and routine is just at baseline something that is helpful for our mental health. So whenever you have a disruption in that structure, that routine, we tend to see a little bit of an uptick in emotions and reach out to the guidance office in conversations with home about different things of that nature. So I think that that's actually pretty normal year to year. I would say that the conversations we're having, like, sometimes are a little bit more specific to the pandemic this year. So understanding how students are spending time alone, understanding that we're not always going to be happy 100% of the time. And because students are home more often, I think that parents and guardians and whomever is at home are just more privy to that visual, kind of understanding that beforehand you were off to school for 5 days a week, and we would maybe have conversations in the guidance office, and then you would go home feeling a little bit more relieved. Now those conversations are happening at home. So parents, and maybe this is a benefit that's come out of the pandemic, is that parents and guardians are more in tune and aware of how their student is feeling on a day-to-day.
So similar to that question, have you noticed any differences in teachers' mental health over the winter break?
I feel like, at least for me, you know, every year we come back from break feeling like refreshed. And I feel like every year I'm like, well, I could have used maybe 1 or 2 more days. This year I feel like I could have used maybe 1 or 2 more weeks. You know, I think that it's been a lot, I think, for all of us, and I'm sure for students too, making all of these changes. And I think that everyone has, like Mr. Meyer said, done a really nice job of adapting, but that takes a toll. You know, I think one thing that Ms. Donahue says a lot is that time and energy are finite. And I really like that sort of snippet quote, because it's true. You know, we only have so much energy to give, and, you know, we as human beings, you know, so teachers, counselors, students, and this year's been hard. You know, it's rearranging an entire curriculum to fit into, you know, 2 80-minute blocks rather than, you know, 5 out of 6, you know, 57-minute blocks, you know, and that, like, it's little things like that. And but you can't just shift over, you know, part of a test or, you know, part of a plan, right? So I think the prep work has been a lot. So while I do think the break was great and, you know, refreshing and nice, maybe not as refreshing as it normally could be. I also think it's been tough not being able to sort of like see families and, you know, travel to other states and, you know, worrying about, you know, if I were to go and, you know, visit my cousins in Connecticut, then I can't come back to work for a few days. And that's hard. You know, it's hard to feel stuck, and not being able to, you know, do the things that kind of help to refresh us and like fill our tanks a little bit.
Yeah. To piggyback off that too, something that I've been reminding myself a lot, and in conversations with not just people at school, but in general, is like, we're only able to control our own actions. And so while everything is under a microscope right now, when we may see people doing things differently in the pandemic, there's nothing you can do about that. And so you really have to kind of focus that finite energy and emotional kind of energy that you have, and focus it on yourself and focus it on those whom you do have that ability to have a conversation with, and not let the actions of others impact what you're doing or impact how your day-to-day is going, because that can become exhausting, worrying about everyone else or being frustrating with how other people may be dealing with the pandemic, and just say, you know what, I can control what I'm going to do, and that's all I can worry about.
All right, thank you for that answer. And the next question is, what advice would you give yourself if you could travel back in time to right before the pandemic?
I think the advice that I would give myself if I could travel back, would sort of be, and it's sort of the advice that I'm going to give myself going forward. And it sounds really corny and touchy-feely, but to like really appreciate what I do have. And one of the things that I remember hearing students when we were remote last spring say is like, I never thought I would miss school, right? And obviously like school is sort of like my thing, which is why I decided, after being a high school student, to like come back and like live my life here. But I never thought I would miss it this much either. I miss the students. I miss, having kind of that normal schedule. And, I want to go forward. I want to appreciate that more. And I would have sort of given myself the advice to do that, and to, really embrace normality a little bit, and be more excited about every single day. And, I tell people all the time, like, I love my job, and I leave work every day, like, exhausted, but excited to come back the next day. And I feel that a little bit less this year, unfortunately. It's more draining. It's not as fun when I can't just like go through the hallways and give people high fives because I can't touch their hands, so I miss a lot of that. So my advice would have been to, remember all the good things and to really focus on those. And that's, again, going to be my advice on the other end of this, and currently too, so there's a lot that I still am thankful for, and so this definitely has helped put a lot of stuff in perspective for me personally.
Yeah, I was actually going to say almost something similar. Of I never thought I would miss, like, it just never crossed my mind that I would miss giving a high five to someone and just like saying hello to people in the hallway, or like walking into Miss Menise's classroom and just kind of like throwing a stress ball at someone and then like running away. Like those human interactions that we have on a day-to-day that I definitely miss, that, like Mr. Williamson said, like fuel our tank and really rejuvenate us and make us feel excited and human and connected to each other. If I were to go back, or if I were to give myself advice before, and similarly to what Mr. Williamson said, it's probably my advice to myself moving forward too, is like, we need to acknowledge our limits, and we also need to know how to separate work from home. Because when you're in class at home, those worlds become intermeshed. And when we work from home, those worlds become intermeshed. And someone said it, and it's probably sounds pretty cliche, but like, you want to be working from home. You don't want to be like at home while you're working type deal. So like, you really still want to be able to separate those two things and say, you know what, it's 3:00. The day is over. I'm shutting my computer, and maybe I'll check it later, but I want to do those things that I would normally do at home because I'm at home, not because I'm at work.
Awesome. Okay. So sort of similar to that last question, in retrospect, is there anything you would have wished had happened differently this semester, whether it be the schedule or having more structure in the day?
To be honest, I want to answer that question and just say no. And I want to say it that way because I think we need to applaud the crazy amount of work that the committees did over the summer to get prepared for this year, the crazy amount of emotional work that the students had to do to totally adjust their schedules to make this year as successful as it has been, and to kind of reflect on things we could have done differently negates that in my mind. And like, it's been one hell of a year. I think we can all acknowledge that. And I'm continuously impressed by how the students are doing. And I'm continuously impressed by our faculty, our staff, who have just, they're going 60 miles an hour, and they're on a one-way street going the wrong way. And they're still dealing with it. So I'm just like really impressed and proud of everyone, students, faculty, staff, everyone who has just kept moving forward and done everything that they can in their power to make this as successful of a year as it has been.
We're all proud of you too, Mr. O'Meara.
Thanks. I pat myself on the back every night.
I think I would echo that. You know, I think that there's always like coulda, woulda, shouldas, but in this case, I think that, you know, we're doing it. You know, it's not fun necessarily, or as fun as a normal year could be, but you know, I think there was a lot of thought put into every decision. And there were, you know, an infinite number of iterations that this could have gone in. But I think that sort of we landed in a place that like I feel pretty good about, you know, given the circumstances. You know, if I look back, like, could I have, you know, I don't know, taken a run on a day that I didn't, and I should have, like, sure, like things like that. But like big picture, I feel, you know, I really feel proud of what we've kind of accomplished together.
All right, I think that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Williamson and Mr. O'Meara. Great talking to you. You have some very insightful answers, and we're very glad we got to talk to you today. So again, thank you for joining us, and I think we're going to wrap it up here. Just hope to see you guys in the halls sometime soon.
Awesome. It was great to talk to you both.